District on Wednesday, April 12th, beginning at 1:08. Welcome, everyone. First order of business is taking roll. Monique, would you take roll, please?
Sure, thank you. This is Monique Salas, Recording Secretary, taking roll. President Waspy,
Here.
Director Coffey,
Here.
Director Eccles, present. Parks District staff coordinators and presenters in this meeting include General Manager Sabrina Landreth, Deputy General Manager Ana Alvarez, Claire Griffin, and Sean Dugan. Today's meeting is held pursuant to the Brown Act. We are providing live audio and video streaming. Members of the public wishing to make a public comment can do so 1, live via Zoom, 2, by submitting an email, or 3, leaving a voicemail. This information is noted on the agenda. If there are no questions about the meeting procedures, we will begin.
All right. Thank you, Monique. Our first item of business today is the sponsorship policy of the non-district events. And Claire, give us a report today. Welcome, Claire.
Great. While Claire's getting set up, I will just queue up the item here. So we, just to remind the board members, we brought this proposed policy to you last month to the committee, and you all provided some really good feedback and constructive feedback. We've gone back to the drawing table a little bit and tweaked the proposal, and hopefully it satisfies kind of the need to give the board the flexibility that you would like, as well as giving us some policy direction, and then certainly making sure that we've got increased transparency around these sponsorships that we are funding, which are really important to the Park District and have a great history of doing. And so really proud of the work that Claire and the whole team has done to put this together, and really optimistic that we can move something forward and provide some guidance to staff and certainly to the board on these policies. So Claire.
Yeah, thanks, Sabrina. Good morning. I'm Claire Griffin, Management Analyst in the General Manager's Office. And we're excited to be here today to share this updated sponsorship proposal to you based on the feedback we received at your meeting in March. So, as Sabrina mentioned, today the policy before you today codifies the best practices for allocation of public funds, and is the product of an interdivisional effort managed by the General Manager's Office in partnership with General Counsel, Finance and Management Services, as well as Public Affairs. And just as a reminder, these are the goals that we developed the policy with. So our goals included establish a policy for sponsorship allocations that supports fairness, accountability, transparency, and aligns with best practices of other public agencies, ensure adherence to legal requirements, incorporate prescriptions against the gift of public resources and political use of public resources, as well as advance the Park District's established mission, vision, and goals through financial and in-kind support for mutually beneficial relationships, and evaluate and award sponsorship requests based on set criteria that crystallizes the public benefit achieved by the agency's participation through the use of public resources. So a little bit of background for the policy that's carried forward today is similar to the policy you saw last month. It was drafted based on benchmarking research that included review of 27 sponsorship policies and/or procedures from other local governments throughout California, and so including several Bay Area park districts. And the sponsorship policy includes 2 pieces. The main piece is to provide guidelines for the provision of financial sponsorships, including eligibility criteria and reporting requirements. And eligibility criteria in the policy prohibit certain partnerships, such as those with individuals or private entities, and require the approved sponsorships must have a clear public purpose aligned with the Park District's mission, benefiting a strategic partnership, or providing a learning opportunity for staff or the board. And the other piece of the sponsorship policy continues the fee waiver and reduction procedure that's already in place for in-kind sponsorship requests primarily for facility rentals for specific groups in need, and also for strategic partnerships for the Park District. So what did we change in the policy? So we examined the data on sponsorship issuance for the last 5 years as a request of the executive committee last month. And that's included in your packet. And we updated the sponsorship policy based on our understanding of past practice through that analysis of data, as well as your recommendations. So to address concerns about the administrative burden of issuing sponsorships, we removed the application and agreement requirements from the policy. We also wanted to provide more clarity, and so we removed some of the definitions from the policy that were no longer relevant, such as the application and agreement. And we clarified the definition of sponsorship and added a definition for tax-exempt nonprofit to clarify that this would be any nonprofit with an IRS designation and not just restricted to 501c3s. And then we also added language to clarify that sponsorships need to be represented as coming from the park district and not from individual divisions, departments, staff members, or directors. And in an effort to provide the board more flexibility to issue sponsorships they deem critical, our proposal is to grant authority not only to the general manager or their designee to issue sponsorships, but also to the board president. And we're hoping that we can also provide more funding for the board to have flexibility in sponsorship issuance. So just a little bit of background on this is data that you saw last month real quickly. Since the pandemic, sponsorship allocations have ranged from about $50,000 to $65,000 a year. And this is the sponsorship appropriations for 2023. And this year, the board's budget for sponsorship is $9,200. And the general manager's budget for sponsorship is $45,000. And the proposed policy would apply to all of these funds in each of these divisions. The criteria would need to be met for each of these divisions to issue sponsorship. But our recommendation is to allow the board president, more flexibility in issuing sponsorship and therefore provide more funding this year in the sponsorship line item. And so this is our proposed budget transfer. Right now, the board of directors has an underutilized contingency fund of $100,000. In the past few years, that has not been used much. And so our recommendation is to take the contingency fund, half of the contingency funds, which provide more restrictions in use and require items over $5,000 go to the full board for approval. Our recommendation is to move $50,000 to the contributions and sponsorships line item for the board budget, which would also provide more transparency in public funds and help us in the reporting requirements in the policy to be very clear about which items were contributions and sponsorships. And then our recommendation is to continue the $45,000 that is in the general manager's office budget for sponsorships, carry that forward in 2023. So that is our recommendation. And we recommend the executive committee consider recommending approval of the proposed sponsorship policy for board of directors approval. And we're happy to answer any questions you have. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from board members? Member Eccles.
Well, Claire, first of all, thank you so much for your work on this and our DGM on Alvarez as well. Really appreciate it. A lot went into this. And you all have already answered all of my questions, I think, except for one that I just thought about while you were talking. And that is, in terms of the budget allocations for 2023, will you still, there were a number of divisions and other parts of the district that also had budget allocations for sponsorships. Does that remain? So we're only talking about changes to the board of directors and to, well, the GM's allocation staying the same as well?
Correct. Yes, our recommendation is to keep those the same for this year.
If I could just chime in for a second, for the upcoming budget though, for 24, we might consolidate those. That might be part of our proposal. One thing that we did change in the policy here is that, and I think you all are aware of this in reading through the memo, but there are the sponsorships that we do just on an annual basis every single year that we will, our proposal is also to bring those to you all to adopt as part of the upcoming budget process. So those would be coming out of essentially the GM's budget. Things that are very standard, non-controversial, things again that we fund every year. And so we'd have real transparency, and it would be adopted as line items in the upcoming budget. So so Claire is correct. We would leave, right now, we are not proposing to touch any of those other divisions buckets, but it's possible as part of this upcoming budget that we might roll them up and consolidate them. But you'll see that in next year's budget.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to echo my colleagues' appreciation of all the work that's been done, and especially the feedback you got from exec committee last time and incorporated into this latest version. And I appreciate the time you've spent with me going over it. So I'm very supportive at this point. I think it's a very well thought out policy. It's clear that there are going to be circumstances that just don't fit perfectly in all these various situations in which we are seeking just to participate in some event as board members or as staff, or there are organizations asking us to support them with sponsorships or buying tickets to events. And my only concern that I've voiced, and management, you folks have shared with me a comfort level, is that it at times, or not at times, but very specifically allows for sponsorships that are consistent with the purpose of the park district and advance a park district goal with a specific audience or group. And to me, that could, in theory, include requests for sponsorship from all sorts of good causes within the two counties. And there are many, 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 many good causes. And some of them are on our chart of sponsorships that we've provided over the last several years. And some of them do make me scratch my head because they're a very good local cause, nonprofit, benefiting the community. But then the nexus, what lawyers call a nexus or privity to the park district, isn't as clear cut. So I think this language doesn't attempt to be overly restrictive of who we can sponsor, and in doing that, leaves it fairly broad. And as long as management is comfortable in its ability to say no when there is presented a group that is a really, really good cause, we all can think of lots of them, but nonetheless isn't something that is directly relevant to what we do, or an organization that we do business with or partner with. And that's something management just really has to be comfortable with. And I don't think we can write the policy to address all those circumstances. So I think that what you have done is very good, and I appreciate all the effort. And the fact that we now have this is very helpful.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you. I think this, I'm glad we addressed this. I think this is a good policy. I'm kind of wondering, something made this come up. And I guess my question would be, of this list of sponsorship, you gave us all the sponsors from 2019 till now. Are there any people on this list or any groups on this list that would be disqualified under this new policy?
Yeah, let's see. There's a few items on the list that don't follow and just don't fit within the sponsorship definition, or were issued to individuals instead of to a public entity or a nonprofit. And so those would be, we wouldn't be doing that with the sponsorship line item in the future, but some of those might be mistakes. I think the League of Women Voters came up as a potentially political organization that would go against the criteria that says that we can't be providing public funds to a political organization. Those are the ones that I have here. And then I think some other board specific ones may not be things that the general manager would choose, but that's under the board president's authority now to make a decision about which of those sponsorships make sense to fund.
Great. Thank you. And I agree with Director Coffey. I'm glad it's fairly broad and we can interpret it. Well, the board members are going to make individual asks, I'm sure, that in this new policy, and then the president will look it over, and hopefully we'll get some guidance from our on some of these things. And I'm also glad there's going to be a report on an annual basis, because I'm always interested in who we sponsor, and I'm glad we sponsor lots of people, and I'm in favor of increasing it if we need be, because I think these relationships are really, really good that we make with people like Colin said, doing great things in our community, just like us. I have nothing else. Is there anything from the public on this item?
I have not received public comments on this item.
And I see no one raising their hand via Zoom. So great. I think our ask today is to recommend to the full board to approve this policy. And at this point, do I have a motion for that?
Sure. I so move.
Okay.
Second.
Moved by Director Eccles, seconded by Director Coffey.
President Waspi, the motion includes the budget transfer.
Yes, it does.
I can read it if you want to be clear. So we are adopting the recommendation from staff for approving the proposed sponsorship policy and the proposed budget transfer for Board of Directors. We're making this recommendation to the Board of Directors. Full approval.
Thank you for getting that in the record. Monique, would you take a roll, please?
President Waspi,
Aye.
Director Coffey,
Aye.
Director Eccles.
Aye.
So moved.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Claire.
Thank you.
Your staff on that. Our next item is an informational update on the Briones pilot project.
All right, I think Ken is getting up here to introduce Sean, and I will just say this item was actually prepared by DGM O'Connor. He's not able to be here today, but certainly we are continuing on schedule to launch the pilot, and per the board's request, have some updates, and just happy to answer any questions. So go ahead, Ken.
Thank you. I don't have that good of a singing voice. Thank you. Should I repeat myself? My name is Ken Wysocki, Assistant General Manager of Acquisition, Stewardship, and Development. I'd like to introduce Sean Dugan, Trails Program Manager for our division, who will be presenting update on the final project plan for the Briones Trails pilot project.
Thank you, Ken. Sean Dugan, Trails Program Manager. Thank you for the introductions, everyone. I am here on behalf of Mr. O'Connor. And so this is an informational item on the Briones pilot project. The goal, I'd like to just reiterate the goal of the pilot project, if I can. Oh, yeah. Despite all my training this morning, I managed to mess that up. So here we are. Now we have that out of the way. All right. So I would like to reiterate the goal for the record of the pilot project is to explore management operational strategies to manage increasing crowding on trails that can reduce trail user conflict, both real and perceived, protect resources, and optimize the trail user experience within the existing trail system. Now, there's a lot of subtext to this that we all know the history of, but I would also add that I think for me, the goal of this pilot project is to provide some data and some real on the ground information to make the board's job easier when making decisions in the future on trail policy and management. So here's real quick the project timeline thus far. So in August 2020, the Trail User Working Group was formed as a result of the 2019 board workshop on trails. And that went for about over a year, about a year and a half. And we discussed a lot of the strategies, a lot of the issues, crowding, trail conflict, everything under the sun related to trails and the users that use those trails. And a lot of the policies that we're proposing in the pilot project reflect those discussions. In December 2021, the pilot project team was formed, and that consists of staff from public safety, planning, trails, stewardship, operations, maintenance and skilled trades, public affairs, and environmental graphics. It's a group of about 20 individuals, but it fluctuates, but a very dedicated team and a large group. In March 2022, we were made aware of the successor group to the Trail User Working Group, which consists of representatives representing hikers, conservationists, equestrians, and mountain bike advocates, sort of a result of the Trail User Working Group. And it was led by a consultant named Josh Sonnenfeld, who is no longer with the group, but that group began interacting with us. And we were pleased to see that happen because that was our hope with the Trail User Working Group, was that groups that were advocating for their positions could start talking with each other as well. In June 2022, a Park Advisory Committee was given a preview of the pilot project. In October of 2022, there was a tour. Myself and Jim O'Connor went to Briones and walked many of these trails. We couldn't walk them all, there's a lot, and introduced them to the pilot project. This is the successor group of the Trail User Working Group that I just mentioned. In December 2022, as you recall, there's an Ordinance 38 update, which added the new section 200.5, which gives the general manager or designee authorization to issue temporary rules, regulations, and take actions to preserve parklands, public health and safety, protect habitat, and distribute parkland resources among competing uses. And that was a paraphrase of that. In February of 2023, the pilot project webpage went live. It has frequently asked questions, summary of what's being proposed, as well as a link to some survey questions that you can submit comments to. Also in February, we had February 25th, we had the community meeting at the park itself. And I'll get into more details about that later in the presentation. In March 2023, the pilot project notice of exemption was posted. Also in March, the memo to the general manager was published through the Ordinance 38 process. And excuse me, just a minute. All right, I'll do, oh wait, maybe that one right there. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. There's too many windows up and they're blocking my slide. And then as a result of that public meeting at Briones on February 25th, the notice of exemption and the rules memo were published, and the pilot project webpage was updated with the final plan and map and the rules that we're proposing. And of course, we're here today with the informational update to the Board Executive Committee. And we are on target for the pilot project to begin next Friday, a week from this Friday, on April 21st, 2023. Of course, now I can't move my slide. I can My apologies again. Jim, we're here. That wouldn't have happened. Okay, so this is what we presented to the community on February 25th and what was on our webpage up until we finalized it. And what you see here is about a 1,200 acre area of Briones that we're calling the pilot zone. It encompassed at the time 4 staging areas. So the park office, Alhambra, Briones Road, and Relias. And there's a couple of walk-in entrances within that. There were 4 bike only, downhill only trails proposed in yellow on the map at the time. There were 3 hike and bike trails or dual use shared by hikers and bikers proposed. And there were 2 hiker only trails in green proposed. We were proposing that on the weekends, there are an odd, even staggered days of use, limiting access for equestrians and bikers on various days by calendar date. And then there are roughly about 10 bootleg trails for closure, depending on how you calculate it. Several miles, roughly 5 miles probably of bootleg trails being proposed for closure. And as you can see, we had a really good turnout at that meeting. We actually barely had capacity for the amount of people that came. It was a very cold and rainy day, but people came out as we were really pleased with the turnout actually. And we met in the tent, we addressed the crowd, and then we broke into smaller groups around tables and talked about the map. And the idea behind this public meeting was to not show up with a blank map and say, what should we do? The idea was to say, this is what we're planning. Where are the red flags? Where are the fatal flaws in this? And engage reactions to the proposals. And some of the key factors that came out of that, some of the things we heard a lot, obviously, but these are some of the main points. Is that we need a bypass trail between the Alhambra Creek staging area and the Briones Road staging area. With the pilot zone being extended up to and including those, it meant that if you showed up on a day that your use happened to be restricted, that you'd have to go completely around the park to another staging area. And that was called out quite a bit, and was a key factor here. Illegal trail use needs to be enforced, especially on the Pine Tree Trail. It already does not allow bikes, but there's a lot of bike use on that. But in general, legal trail use needs to be enforced. We've heard that time and time again. The need for additional hiking only trails within the pilot that was from the hiking community. And the Isaacs Trail, it's called the Isaacs Trail. It is an illegal bootleg trail. The biking community really wanted to see that as a part of this. And we heard that at that meeting. And so the result of that is what went back, the team went through all of the surveys that we received online and the information we received at that meeting in person and revised the plan to provide a bypass between Alhambra Creek and the Briones Road staging area and shrinking the zone in effect. We did add the Isaacs bike only downhill trail, which is just outside of the zone. We did not extend the zone, however, because then that would have eliminated another bypass so that you couldn't get through. And when looking at these trails and determining which trails should be restored, which trails should stay, what uses should go where, et cetera, we applied a criteria with our stewardship department on the habitats that these trails go through, but as well as sort of a soft science of looking at the Strava heat map data and engaging the amount of use that these trails are receiving, thus determining if we close this one, it's likely to stay closed, for instance, versus the trails that are receiving a lot of use, we will have a harder time keeping closed. And we've had that experience in particular on the Hank and Frank or the B1 and B2 trails in yellow here. And so the decision was made to switch and add Isaacs, but then to turn the trail, the green trail P9 in the middle of core whipsnake habitat to hiker only, which was previously biker only, because it's generally known in the scientific community that bikers they're considered, or mountain bikes and tires are considered more detrimental to whipsnake. Thus kind of opening this refuge of whipsnake habitat within, between these with just a hiking trail through the middle, which our stewardship department was in full support of. We now have 3 hike and bike trails in orange, you see there. And please note that on no bike days, on odd days, on even days on the weekend, bikes are not allowed within the zone. And on those days, those shared use trails would be hiker only. And one of those trails, TB7, is referred to as the Traverse Trail that we've heard about from the community, wanting that to be hiker only. This is a balance that we've found that is in fact hiker only on no bike days. There are 3 hike only trails. We converted some to hike only, and we removed the original one that was going along the Alhambra Creek there because we want to analyze that one further for resource impacts. So it's been removed from the pilot. We converted. Yep, and I mentioned the T9 trail, and then we are still going with the odd even day rules, which I'll show you in a graphic earlier. It's easy to later. That's easy to understand. And there's about 9 bootleg trails for closure right now in this plan, but really, it's not about the number of trails. It's about the mileage and the habitat that's been preserved, unbifurcated. I don't think that's a word. Debifurcated, but we're restoring about 5 miles of trail in this and opening about 3.5 to bikes and almost 2 to pedestrians only. And there are just over 2 miles of pedestrian bike trails within this final plan here. Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. Oh, there we go. Okay, so a little on the community outreach and education. So we have, as I mentioned, we have the pilot project webpage, and that has a ongoing survey and comment section that is collecting data as we speak. We monitor that. It has updates from the project team and also a complete overview and frequently asked questions. The community meeting and open house on the 25th of February, that meeting was advertised on Nextdoor. It was on our Briones Facebook page on our website. It was put in the City of Lafayette website, the City of Pleasant Hill website, posted there, and advertised in local media around Briones, such as the Diablo Gazette, the Clay Cord, the La Miranda Weekly, and the East Bay Times Weekly. Additionally, we have been talking with the successor group, the Trail User Working Group, and anyone else interested that has heard about this, and letting them know of this meeting. The idea was to have a very focused meeting at Briones that the community and park users of Briones could come and give helpful feedback, and not have the meeting blow up into a commentary about trail management, enforcement, and mountain biking in general, or conservation in general at the park. So we really did try to focus the group that we got. And as I mentioned before, we had over 100 people show up. We've been providing email updates. We have an email, Briones Pilot Project at ebparks.org, which is receiving emails daily, and we're responding and sending out notices through that email. In the May-June issue of Regional in Nature, or the RIN, there'll be, the back page will have an expose on the pilot project. Mainly, the point or the effort there is to get volunteers to come and help restore trails and do trail work within the park. So look for that. There will be a Park It article released this Friday, the 14th. And there are now informational signs going up at all the park staging areas. And I have to tip my hat to the environmental graphics team at the district. They're impressive, and they have designed a whole cadre of new signs that were not available before. And I'll show you one of the informational sign in the next slide. A press release will go out Monday the 17th. That's this next Monday. It is on the social media, on the district Facebook and Instagram pages, and continues to be discussed on there. And then really, last but not least, we have our park ambassadors and trail user, the Trail Safety Patrol and other park staff tabling at the staging areas, the 2 main staging areas, Alhambra and Relias. Last weekend, they were there, and they had over 100 contacts. 60 flyers were handed out, and 20 flyers for volunteering were handed out. And then, of course, they're collecting data and asking people what they think and providing that to us. A whole range of responses, of course, as you can imagine. But we feel that is really important right now up until the pilot starts on the 21st, but then we'll continue that for several weeks afterwards. So this is the sign that's gone up at the staging areas. It's a large sign. I forget the dimensions, but it's something like 40 by 36, so that you can see the map and the colors. There's a little history and the regulations that we're summarizing in the bottom. And then there's the table up top is what there were a lot of renditions of this table, let me tell you, but we're trying to communicate a lot of different rules within one graphic and in one table. And we felt like at the end that we really, this was the best we could do here. It's kind of showing the weekdays hikers are allowed, bikers and horses are all allowed during the weekdays, Monday through Friday. But then on odd numbered weekend days, the horses are not allowed in the pilot zone. And on even days, bikes are not allowed in the project zone. And that's by calendar date. And that includes, it doesn't matter if it's a holiday or not, it's an odd or even day that these restrictions apply. Here's a closer, sorry, I should have shown you this while I was speaking to it, including the logo on the top left there, designed by our environmental graphics team. And so some next steps here. So we're going to continue with community outreach and education. We're continuing to collect information from the community on this. I'm going to work with our human resources department to hire 2 temporary staff to assist with data collection, observations, sort of host them within the park as much as we can. And that was something that Jim started that I will now continue in his absence. They will be, the goal is to have them assigned to my program and work with park staff and the small trails crew as that forms, as well as working with our planning and GIS staff. Big part of this project is implementing the closure and restoration of illegal bootleg trails. We're now securing the California Conservation Corps, as well as the East Bay Civic Corps and our small trails crew and park staff and volunteers to begin restoring in a bunch of different ways, closing, limbing, blocking, or putting barriers to these trails, all kind of out of the state parks handbook. We don't know exact. It's going to be different for every trail, so we're working on the details of that. But we will begin restoring and closing these trails as soon as we can, likely the week of the 24th of April. And then something that I don't have all the details about, but Jim had set up, and we need to, and then I will take on the touring and a project overview with the police department special enforcement unit to discuss how this rule should be enforced and to get them up to speed on what we expect out there. And I believe that, I should mention that with as far as data collection, we do have several trail counters now. We have trail counters at each staging area entering the pilot zone. We've been collecting data for about 3 months on those. And we have trail counters throughout the trail system, and we plan to put more in there. We're designing a survey that we would like to have people's reaction to this once it's going. And taking pictures and using the crowdsourced data from Strava, the heat maps, to see how our rules and what changes as this gets implemented. We hope it's noticeable that the bootleg trails that we're closing don't show any heat anymore, and that we see a shift in activity. And we can go all the way back to 2019 with that data. So we have a pretty good baseline of how park activities have been going thus far. And so we hope to be able to illustrate to the board in 6 months when we return after the date it starts to show what's happened out there and what we've heard, et cetera. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Sean. Any questions, comments, board members?
Sure.
Go ahead, go on.
Thank you, Sean, and hoping Jim feels better.
Me too.
Get in touch with him, and I know this is near and dear to him. Tremendous amount of time he's put in on this for now close to a couple of years. I was concerned after we heard from some folks at a meeting. Was it last week? Time is flying. And I had asked for some feedback on this timeline that you've given about the community outreach and notice to folks, and to give the context for about a couple of years worth of effort that has led to this, including all the community outreach. My concern has been, and I've exchanged these thoughts with you and Jim, because this struck me as there's a need to be responsive to this, is for the community input session we had out in the park, because that was April 25. We didn't actually post those notices in the park. So of all that outreach, and it was fairly comprehensive and extensive, and certainly to existing stakeholders and all their lists, and many of them were successful in generating turnout for that event. It was a concern for me that the people who actually used the park weren't seeing notices posted of that. And I do think, and I think you've implemented here, management generally, a process that will engage the public as this pilot proceeds, as it actually is implemented. I especially like the idea of inviting actual users to participate, to actually have volunteer opportunities. I see basically an unending need for people to table out there, and even be up in the hills by the trailheads, circulating information about the pilot. So there certainly should be those opportunities. Side note that's purely personal to me is I am really pleased to hear that we already started the tabling and that it's been going on in the weekend. And I just didn't get the invitation, so I feel left out. I want to.
That will certainly be remedied. And yeah, there's actually, and I apologize, I've been gone for 2 weeks and I'm jumping in, but I believe there is a way we can sign up, and I need to go
Oh,
do
maybe
that.
it's through the website, so it didn't get out to the ambassadors. So make
I'll make sure that
someone, Jen, somebody make an effort to get those of us that are on
Absolutely.
the ambassador list, because we're very anxious and don't want to feel left out. I went out on my own Monday afternoon because I knew the sign was up, and I'm going to go back some more. Because of that concern. Well, what are actual users out there, the folks that are out there thinking about this? And so I go out and bother people that are at the trailhead in Alhambra. This was Monday afternoon, and happily, most people there had seen the sign at some point and read it and were aware of the project and supportive of the project. It seems to be the feedback that we've gotten throughout this outreach program from all the stakeholders and from the actual users of the park. I am now assured from being out in the park, there is lots of support for doing something about the just the sheer volume of people and the sheer volume of bootleg trails that have shown up and are being developed and continue to be developed. So there is a universal acceptance that something needs to be done, and people are pleased to see this is being done who are actual users out there. So I'm going to continue to go out and just learn that way. That's the best way for me to learn, is to actually be out there and talk to people. And I did that 6 months ago with a survey, and that informed me a lot that what we were doing was popular, and people liked the idea, and they do want to be involved. So that's all well and good. The downside is from the exposure to them, that what is a large sign out at the trailhead, at least the one I'm familiar with at Alhambra, there is confusion. And the confusion is with, if my use of the park does not fall within an even or odd day, what are my options? And so there's confusion among hikers of whether they just can't go to the park on certain days. Certainly among bikers, the same. And it gets back to that issue that we heard from bicyclists of whether it's an odd or even day on a weekend, if we're not supposed to be in the zone, are we excluded from the whole park, that whole using that trailhead? Because that is and continues as of this couple of days ago to be some confusion over that. And I understand it because I look at it and well, does this mean I want to ride my bike through it? I just can't come to this. You went over that slide. There has been some accounting provision for a means by which if a bicyclist is there on a odd or even day that precludes bicycles, there's some way they can still use Alhambra to get to other parts of that vast park. And that's what you were just showing on one of these slides. So I'm going to have to get more familiar with that simply so I can answer that question. That's the case. So it is now designed. So if you're precluded on a certain odd or even day on a weekend, you nonetheless can use that trailhead to get somewhere.
That is correct. The pilot zone does not include the staging areas themselves now,
Okay.
except for the Relias staging area. That one will, if you show up at that staging area and you're not allowed in the zone that day, you have to go to the Alhambra or the Briones Road staging area. But there's the bypass between the two main staging areas. And we're seeing most people come in through the Alhambra staging area.
Yeah, and I just think a bicycle, my own thought, and I got to go over these maps, maybe with you.
I'm happy to go over it with
because I have to be able to answer these questions when I'm out there. And I was a little not all that good at it Monday. But whether you can get in there and use the Orchard Square trail to get around to the Old Briones Road access to the park if you're on a bicycle. I thought that was true. I'm not so sure now because I got to learn this stuff. And so I will appreciate the opportunity to do that because I want to make sure we have that down.
Director Coffey, I should mention that we have a list of about, I think it's 50 frequently asked questions and the response to those
Is
questions.
that on the website?
It is not.
Oh.
We didn't want to put 50. So, but that's an internal document that I think is a good talking point, has good talking points for you and anyone tabling that we've been sharing.
Oh yeah, my goodness.
You need to have that. Yeah.
Thank
And that's mainly what I wanted to say. Yeah, I'm happy to provide that.
Yeah, because I think that's the challenge is going to be dissipating confusion that will exist, and it's bound to exist at first because people stare at the sign and read it and still, you can miss that stuff. I do, and so we're gonna have to work on that and have people out there that can answer that question, particularly for bicyclists. And the other thing I need to know, and probably it's personal to me, is we have continue to use names that I'm not familiar with. I know Hank and Frank, but it's been given some other names. And I know that now I know what I've been told is the Bench Trail, is Traverse Trail, is also some dead cow trail. Or there's those uses. And so I need to make sure I understand that. So I'm out there and can talk to people,
Okay.
and people who do tabling are going to have to know those nuances to the social names given to some of these trails.
We do have we started to form what we're calling, I believe, a crosswalk document. So P3 is also called these on YouTube and Strava. And so I'll check and see if that's finalized, but that is helpful. And it was helpful for us to create as well. Some of the names I don't want to say through the microphone because we didn't create these trails. We didn't name them, right? But they're known to the community. So we're in a little bit of a weird spot here where we don't really want to call them by the common name, but that's how people know them. And, so we'll work that out as we go. But
All right. And my last thought I want to impart as we embark on this endeavor is that in a very important part of this pilot that's been very important to me and will gauge success or not over the period of time of the pilot is whether we can successfully restore habitat. In other words, this effort to close bootleg trails so that, yes, we are we get some anguish over rewarding people for bootleg trails. And my response to that has been, you tell me how we can otherwise recoup habitat and restore habitat without creating brand new trails. And this seems to be the way we can do that. But I remain, I don't want to use the word skeptical, but concerned that these trails designated for closure and restoration of habitat will, in fact, be successful in doing so. And we have to engage the bicyclists leadership in that endeavor to try to establish a culture that I believe exists up in Crockett Hills on that issue. And they keep expressing a willingness, an enthusiasm for doing that. It remains to be seen, but we have to engage them to instill that culture that there are going to be some trails that you folks have been using no more. And in fact, we want you to help us keep them closed and help us restore habitat. And I'm skeptical, but I'm also enthused about what I see coming back from those folks on the willingness to do that. And I've taken a lot of your time, but this is huge, and it's very important, especially now that we embark on the educational process and the feedback as we go of how this is working. And I look forward to being involved.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Elizabeth?
Thank you, Sean. Really appreciate the presentation and all your work on this and for jumping in to fill in for Jim. And I do hope that Jim feels better soon, and really appreciate all his work on this and everyone who was involved. It is a well thought out plan, and I appreciate how you took into account the various stakeholder input that seems to be well reflected in the pilot that's going forward. That Colin already covered to some extent my main issue, which is, I agree that really the key to this and to making this work and to making this a successful example going forward is the implementation of the closure and restoration of those trails. And so I'm glad you talked a little bit about that in your presentation, but certainly we will be looking to that to going forward to see whether this really is going to work or not. And, certainly I agree that it's important for the leadership and the biking community to make that clear. I think a lot of them have already. What's hard is that you have a lot of good actors and people willing to do the right thing and willing to volunteer to help restore the trails. But then, just takes a few bad actors to really mess things up for everyone. And so that's the challenge. And it's going to take, so certainly it'll take leadership from the community, but also it will take some enforcement on our part as well. In addition to the outreach, I like I want give people a chance to do the right thing, but we're going to have to be prepared to enforce it if they don't. So not just with the closure and restoration, but also make sure that there aren't new bootleg trails. And so that was really the main point that I wanted to make. And the other question I had, so on the issue of odd or even days and when different groups can come and use those trails, I do anticipate some confusion around that. So I'm glad the outreach is ongoing. But what happens if someone does show up on the wrong day? How will that be enforced, or how will that be handled?
So two aspects to your question. Again, if you do show up to one of the main staging areas and it happens to be the day that you're not allowed in the pilot zone, we hope that the map is very clear that you can still go this way. But we're also putting out about over 100 signs in the pilot zone, which is a lot. But some of those signs are directional. And so we have talked about, hey, the bypass trail this way, and that could be something that could be made more clear. So that's what happens if you're an individual and you show up and you're confused and you don't know what you should do. As far as somebody who comes into the zone anyway, then, right, that shouldn't be there that day, we are enforcing these rules. They're going to be enforced like other Ordinance 38 rules. There's a lot of carrots in this, but there will be some sticks. So we're going to try that through education, through outreach. I don't know how long it will be. We're working with public safety to talk about a grace period, so there'll be warnings, et cetera. But eventually there's going to be enforcement of these rules. And so what happens, our public safety likes to leave that up to the individual officers in the field. So I couldn't really generalize on that, whether that's a ticket or whether that's a warning. But we are working with our public safety to have a strong presence within the zone here. And the idea is that, like I said, there's a lot of we're giving a lot here, we feel, and we're trying to find a balance. But it has to come with that enforcement piece, but not that enforcement piece alone.
Right.
So, hope that
No,
helps. answer.
Absolutely. It is a partnership, and it is an agreement. So everyone has to uphold their ends of the agreement. And if that, certainly we hope that everyone does that voluntarily, but if not, there does need to be a strong enforcement of the rules.
Agreed. I agree.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Sean. And I agree with my colleagues. This is well planned. You talked to lots and lots of constituents and people in the community. I think it's an excellent plan. But, I'm going to use the word skeptical, like Colin. I got to hit you with a couple of skeptical questions. I bet a lot of people don't agree with this. And I'm wondering, so you said we're going to hire 2 temps to assist with the data collection. What you mean? Are those people going to sit there and say, "Oh, there's a person on a bike and he's going on a bike trail, and there's a hiker going on a hiking trail," or is it going to be, or what are those 2 people going to do, and where will they work?
Thank you, Director Waspy, for that question. We are working out the details on that, and I want to speak more with our Human Resources Department to determine where they'll be sitting, what vehicle they'll be using, et cetera. Those are some details that I haven't engaged in yet. But the idea is that we're putting a lot of trail counters out there. A lot of those counters, the cheaper ones that we can put a lot of out, you have to go to those counters physically and download the data and then go back to a computer and upload it. And then you can analyze that data over time to see trends, et cetera. So they'll be collecting data from the counters. We are going to be implementing intercept surveys as well. We hope that at the staging areas, along with the tabling, as this goes on, and this won't be every day, but judging from the use we're seeing come in through and the hours of use where the peak times are, we would like to strategically place those individuals and other staff at locations where there's peak use and we can get the most surveys that we can for that data. There's also, like I mentioned, there's 100 signs. As our experience when we put up signs in the park is there's a balance between how easy that sign is to take out and how angry the user is. There's going to be signs removed and probably thrown in the creek, we anticipated, to your skepticism point. And so we need to inventory those and make sure those signs are there. Because as you mentioned, it's kind of a confusing situation. There's a lot of rules. People will get used to it. But if there's not a sign there, that gets even more confusing. So we'll need to have them monitoring that. And then also just observing and going in through the park on days where maybe bikes aren't allowed. Do we see bikes? Just taking general observations, pictures of conditions, and certain trouble spots that we identify through time. And then lastly, ensuring that those bootleg trails are actually closed and that the signs are still there, that whatever physical treatments we've done to close those trails are in place, et cetera. So those are some of the things I'm envisioning. But I have a feeling that through time, there's going to be things that come up that we'll need extra staff for. I mentioned there's 20 people on the team. They all are doing this along with the other duties that they have. This is a special project, so to speak. And everyone's really excited about this on the team at this point. But at first they've like, the park staff, I mean, they're putting in 100 signs, right? They looked at me with like deer in the headlights, 100, you know? So they need help out there while they continue to like recoup from the last winter we had. And then yeah. So anyway, in volunteer events, we need them out there to act as crew, to help organize, get tools to the site, et cetera. So there's a lot of work to do out there. And I feel like, but the details of like where they'll sit, et cetera, we're still working those things out.
All right, well, just without trying to micromanage, I hope they're on scene. I mean, they're in this office here downloading data on who comes on an Alpha camera. I think they'd be more effective on scene to let them know that we're concerned what's going on out there. But anyway, that's just my opinion.
Point noted.
So, and so I'm reading through this, the meeting, there were going to be 10 trails, bootleg trails restored. I was told there were 13 total, but those numbers get crazy with me. If there are 10 that were going to be restored, now it's down to 9, and 1 bootleg trail is going to be continued or being used. So it'll be incorporated into the plan. I think that's a terrible mistake. It's okay. You guys do your jobs. Who's Isaac? I hope we're not naming a trail after the guy that did the bootleg trail. Is Isaac going to build the trail late at night?
My guess is he's the guy who built it.
Great. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. But
we didn't name it, and I don't know.
Well, I truly hope we rename it if Isaac's the one that built the bootleg trail. I don't know where this is going to go, but I think my skepticism is only not in the plan, not in the incorporating the community, not in anything other than enforcement. And I don't think we can enforce it. And I don't think it's going to be enforced. And I don't think it'll be successful unless we do enforce it. So, but anyway, on the enforcement deal, so the SEU Special Enforcement Unit is going to be in charge of this. They're going to, I mean, obviously the answer is we've got other duties. How are they going to enforce it? How will they enforce it? Will there be people on site to enforce these rules? What's it look like?
That's a great question, Director Waspy. I don't have the answer right now, but I will continue to keep the general manager updated on how those conversations go and what the plan is. I will just say that there will be an increase in special enforcement unit presence within the zone.
And I will just say on top of that, I have spoken with obviously the command staff within the police department on this, but even officers within that unit, they are very excited and that they're going to be given some very clear direction on what to do on this enforcement with the pilot. And they've been had a seat at the table with the working group from day one. So I know Jim has been in really active conversation with them to give them clear direction. And they've said to me that this is really a welcome pilot so that they can really be out there and know exactly what they're supposed to be doing. So they're on board. And just again, this is a pilot. It's been all hands on deck, as Director Coffey noted, for about 2 years here to get to this point. But it is a pilot. And so because the board's given us the flexibility to do this on the management operational side, we will tweak it as we need to, as we go through it. And if we find that the way that we've set up the enforcement is not effective, then we'll tweak it and bring that back to the board if we need some additional help from you. But that's certainly the intent.
Okay, and then a follow-up on that point is, so when the special enforcement unit goes out there, and if in fact they stop someone from riding illegally or hiking illegally on a biking trail, whomever is doing the wrong thing, this is a direct violation of Ordinance 38, we've already been told. And I support the idea of a police officer having the ability, an individual police officer to have the ability to make a decision. If someone says, oh, I apologize, I'm totally spaced out, I missed it. Yeah, I would give that person a warning. But I'm wondering, seriously, specifically, do you get 5 warnings, or do you get 6 warnings, or 10 warnings? Or we're not going to enforce this because it's too trivial? Or is it 1 warning, 1 ticket? And how is the data going to be done? Because as a board member, I'm going to theoretically make a decision on this in 20 months. And if we get a report back that, oh, nobody's riding illegally, but if there's a bunch of warnings, in fact, they are riding illegally. We're just being nice to them. So I guess the question is, and this is a terrible question to be asking you, if there was a police officer here, I'd ask that question. If you warn someone from riding illegally or doing anything illegal in Ordinance 38, and you're given a warning, is that a written warning? It's like a verbal counseling memo in the park district, and then a verbal warning, and then a written warning. How does that work? Or will we compile that data? Because I think it'll be very important.
Yeah, so I can
I know there's no
probably
answer to
address
that,
that.
I hope we get.
Yeah, so absolutely, it's a great question. Yes, so initially this will be more informational warning, educational efforts out there. I think it's, as we all note, this is going to take a little time for the users to totally understand exactly where they're supposed to be and when. So there will be an initial kind of educational period, but regardless, we have already worked with public safety on creating individual tracking codes so that we will have this data. So on the warnings, who's being warned, when, and then certainly on the actual citations when those start. So we'll be able to, look at that and say, okay, no, that, same people are getting warned 5 times over on the same trail. We need to do something differently. So really being able to real time react to that, and Patty and her group within public safety are already on board with that. So there'll be a lot more kind of granular tracking than we currently have.
And then, and I don't want to put you on the spot here. I wish we had a police officer here. What is the penalty for riding illegally on a trail that you're not supposed to be on? I mean, is it monetary? Do they throw you in jail? Do they flog you in public?
I can answer that. Sorry, my computer just died, so I'm off camera. Jason Rosenberg, Assistant General Counsel. The structure for the Ordinance 38 is it's a misdemeanor unless otherwise indicated as an infraction. Also, with our recent updates to the ordinance, there is the ability to drop it down to an infraction, and that's within the discretion of the district. So it can be treated like a misdemeanor or an infraction. It's up to the discretion of the district to handle that. And also there will be, on the standard administrative citation form that we are, this Park District Police has and be issuing it. So it's almost like a parking ticket that can get issued, the way that those are issued.
And the difference we do, pardon me, I don't know this, an infraction and a misdemeanor means misdemeanor, you can go to jail, an infraction, you just pay a ticket, right? Or is an infraction just nothing?
It's, for all intents and purposes, it's the amount of the fine. So infractions are a lower schedule, and misdemeanors are technically a misdemeanor. You could face some jail time, but that's not what we're looking at here by any means. And that would have to be, it's just, that's not on the table here for jail time.
Right.
But it's really an issue of penalty amount. It's a lower schedule for infractions versus misdemeanors.
And then once, I hope you know this, what's the penalty for building a bootleg trail?
Well, this is, again, it goes to the additional tools that the Park District Board gave us with the nuisance abatement encroachment ordinance that was recently adopted last year. So if we are able to identify somebody that illegally built a trail on our property, we could get them to fix it, or at our cost, we charge them against the cost. If that's, there's 2 different approaches you can take. There's the administrative citation remedy, where it's like a ticket and you get issued a penalty. That's more of like a one-time offense, like being on the trail, you're not allowed. You get you pay a penalty like a parking ticket. The other approach is if, this is not just for building trails, it's for extending your yard into the Park District's property. We ask them to, we abate the nuisance, and we're able to recover the full cost of that abatement.
So, and we've had that happen. Somebody built an illegal trail in Anthony Chabot, and it was a pretty sophisticated operation that occurred over months, I think, I'm told, and with cutting some trees down and stuff like that. And how did we deal with that? Did we charge it as an infraction or?
Well, unfortunately, I believe this happened prior to the effective date of our recent ordinance enactment. Going forward, we'd be able to charge them the full cost
So
if we're able to prosecute, address that issue.
there surely was some type of violation that occurred there, even without that change, right? So
For sure. Yeah, I mean, that would have probably have been a violation of the ordinance and prosecuted like a administrative citation, but it's those types of violations that are an ongoing offense that have a kind of permanent impact on the park resources, we now have the ability to address that more comprehensively and with the goal of fixing the problem that was created.
Well, thank you. I think this is a great program. I really, in my history in the park district, unfortunately, we can be nice to everybody, but you got to enforce it at some point. There's a lot of people that want to build bootleg trails, as evidenced by what we see all the time. I wish you the best.
Thank you.
Are there any comments from the public on this?
No, President Rossby, I have not received any public comments or requests to speak on this item.
Can I add one thought?
Sure.
You-
Oh, yeah, let's didn't want to cut anybody off. If anybody has anything else to add?
No, you just said some very important things and it triggered some thoughts. And that is the premise you and I share, that it will be difficult to keep people from either opening trails we try to close or creating new ones, and that's going to be an ongoing and continuing problem. What I come to this with, though, isn't so much a concern about getting past our enforcement efforts. I do sense that there's going to be an increased level of enforcement because of the specificity around these rules. It allows us to enforce better than we have in the past, be able to enforce better than we have in the past. But I wouldn't want to create an illusion that we're going to be able to enforce all of this all the time. You know, we've had very strong rules against creating bootleg trails, and we've found it very difficult to enforce. We've had very obviously limited success in enforcement out in Briones among these specific hills. And having talked a lot to our beat officers out there and our park rangers out there, and having done the helicopter trip over there, you can see exactly why it's so hard to enforce. It's heavily wooded, where they like to build the bootleg trails. It's easy to just not be able to see them doing it. You only see them riding them when they're coming out onto the main trails. And at night, it's completely invisible activity, even to the helicopter, except on the infrared. You know? So in other words, going out and cutting fences and moving logs and doing what they do. So I'm not under any illusion that this is all of a sudden going to get easier to enforce, other than we have some very specific locations and very specific rules, and that'll help, which is why I default back to the need to have a new culture among the mountain bikers, in the sense of taking ownership in what we're trying to do to, as you provide, there's a give and take here. It's, use that word, transactional. You know, we want to restore habitat, but you need to participate in that. And it's not going to be subject to us just throwing a lot more officers out there, or rangers and volunteers. We will be doing some of that, but it's, you know, it's impossible to have people out there 24 hours a day at every trailhead, at every area they use. And if you're somewhere else, you can't see because of the forests, the heavily wood. So anyway, I'm thinking that the success isn't necessarily going to be dependent on how many officers or rangers we have patrolling, as much as will the mountain bike community embrace this and create peer pressure and cultural understanding that this needs to work in order to enhance our ability to have a couple of fun trails and not be harassed and not have conflicts. So this is the give and take, and that's what it's going to be dependent on. And it may, if it doesn't work, it's, in my mind, it's not going to be because we didn't have enough cops. It's because that culture didn't pervade.
Thank you for that. I'll only respond and say that when folks are speeding through a section of roadway, you can put in a speed bump or you can post an officer there, right? One's a lot easier to do. So there are some speed bumps that we're putting in the pilot zone, and those are trail counters. Those are infrared, heat maps from the crowdsourced data that we will track, and also observational. When we know that right now, we know that certain bootleg trails are going to be harder to close than others. And so we're going to be watching very closely. And that, I think that's the issue. This isn't unique to Briones, right? We have 125,000 acres-ish. And, you know, we can't be everywhere all at once. So we're testing out a whole bunch of strategies to figure out what works for us, what we can actually manage given our capacity, and what our cops can manage. And then again, how the community responds. And that is our message to the biking community. I will say a lot of these trails have been here before mountain bikes existed.
Yes.
So I don't want to pigeonhole them too much, but we do know that there are bikers building trails in Briones. So we're not naive to that either. That's our message, is this has to work. Show us that, prove my hypothesis. And I want to prove this to you, Director Waspy, through this. I hope that our data shows that we can do this, is that if we provide access, sustainable access that is limited, that takes bikers away from places where they shouldn't be, that they won't go build trails themselves because we've provided it. That's a big hypothesis that I want to test here, but the message is, hey, we're giving you this. That means you don't get this. It's transactional indeed. So that's all I'll say on that.
Well, I agree. I think there's a bunch of good people, and a bunch of good people have worked on this for a very long time. I think there's a very few bad people, I don't want to use that word, but people who won't follow those rules. And I don't think we can enforce it for a long time either, but having worked here a long time with a lot of bad behavior, I don't know that I'm right. I could be totally wrong. But, you know, one of the biggest things the Park District did 30 years ago is pick specific parks, Redwood Park, no alcohol, or we stopped letting people drive in there. Took Sunol, said no alcohol anymore. That was an ingrained tradition, boy. That was one of the biggest things we ever did. And all we did was throw cops at Sunol Park every week. Every cop, you do that in the old days. Every cop down there, and bingo, people get mad, and not just warnings. You get a warning, but then if you came in there the next weekend, you'd get a ticket. And then if you just keep getting, it's a terrible, archaic way of doing things, but it kind of works in some cases. Shadow Cliffs was the best. I mean, everybody came there to drink from San Jose, from all over the place. People would come to Shadow Cliffs, and then they were told you couldn't drink here. And now it's a bunch of families having fun. And I don't know how to characterize that versus whatever. But the point was, hit it really hard, really fast. And, there's great plan. But if you're meeting with SEIU next week, that would leave you approximately 4 days to get a plan. And if there's no plan yet for enforcement, then you planned everything else has been planned perfectly, in my opinion. I just hope I just think you're going to have to do some. I could be wrong. But anyway.
Want to say one quick thing on the record. And I think all of us agree with you, society depends on voluntary compliance. You can never have enough enforcement on these, but certainly, we have to have some enforcement. So, and I know DGM O'Connor's he does have a plan. I just apologize because he's not here. But I do want to just say one quick thing on the record. This is to our staff and then to the public, but I've been a broken record about this. It's a pilot. And the definition of a successful pilot is that we will have learned something from it. So, we have various theories on how this is going to turn out, but I'm just really proud of the staff and their creativity in actually trying something. So really, really excited. I think Sean mentioned this, but per the ordinance, the amendment that you put in place earlier this year, we will be back to you. I believe it's within 6 months, we're required to come back and give you a report out. So I anticipate we'll probably be back to the operations committee or this committee before that, depending on how things go, just to give you an informational update. But certainly if there are questions that come up throughout the pilot, we are all available and really excited about getting this thing going.
All right, thank you. Any further comments? I'll ask the public once again if they want to comment. Hearing nothing. Thank you very much. This is informational. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate it. Good luck. Our next item is public comments. Any public comments?
President Waspia, I have not received any written comments or any requests to speak.
All right. Are there any comments from committee members? Hearing none. General Manager, you have any comments? My goodness. We are adjourned. Thank you all for being here.